Incoming news. As of today, the United States is at war with itself. Two of the main causes are Bleeding Kansas and the Dred Scott decision. It began when both sides, anti-slavery and pro-slavery advocates in Kansas, hoped to use the ballot box to swing the territory to slave or free, with slaveholders outnumbering free soilers. To ensure their victory, however, pro-slavery leaders wanted to beat the opposition in the upcoming elections for a representative in Congress and for the territorial legislation. Pro-slavery forces from Missouri, led by David Atchison, cast ballots in the Kansas elections and secured a majority in the legislative with about 5,000 illegal ballots cast on May 30th, 1855. An election was held again because of this, and the outcome ended in the Free Soilers' victory. However, when the legislation met later that year, it refused to seat those who voted in the recent election. The issue that slowly began to sink in was that this was less about legalizing slavery and more about if Kansas would allow the rights of whites to be suppressed. When the territorial governor, Andrew Reeder, tried to do something about the fraud caused by Atchison and several Missourians, Franklin Pierce, the president at that time, supported the pro-slavery forces and replaced Reeder with William Shannon. This made it extremely complicated for free soilers, as they had no intention of living under such laws that were based around fraud and not taking into account the people's opinions. Eventually, because of their persistence and large quantity and numbers, free soilers had a convention in Topeka where they adopted a constitution that wanted to put an end to slavery expansion and allowed free blacks in Kansas. Additionally, they selected a new state legislator and governor. This led Kansas into having two constitutions and two legislators that were greatly opposing one another in 1856, one by the pro-slavery forces in Lecompton and the other by the anti-slavery forces in Topeka. Shortly after, Kansas fell into a bloody violence, hoping to show how serious they were by acts of arson, looting, pure destruction of property, and murder. Neither party seemed to be ending their fight anytime soon, and it was sort of egged on when a man known as John Brown got involved due to his own strong religious beliefs that he grew up with as a young boy, when he instigated the Potawatomi Massacre, where 5 pro-slavery men were brutally murdered. Like, their heads were chopped off, as well as their limbs, and as well as the sack of Lawrence, which brought about a decade of fighting in Kansas. This event, the Bleeding Kansas, helped the cause of the Civil War, as it brought unrest in the western states, on which territories were going to be what? People couldn't decide whether they were going to be free or if they were going to be a slave state, because people just wanted one or the other. They didn't want to meet a middle ground. It also just made the tensions rise even more than it already had, adding more fuel to the fire that was about to explode from a small flame into this roaring bonfire. Even more fuel was added when an occurrence in 1846 happened with Dred Scott, a slave. He sued the government for his freedom after his master, Dr. John Emerson, died. Scott, as well as his wife Harriet and daughter, claimed that residents within free territory should make them free, which got them the win in Missourian courts, smaller ones at that. However, the Missouri Supreme Court reversed this decision, despite previously allowing former slaves their freedom in similar cases like Scott's, deciding that instead needed to be seen from a federal point of view. In 1856, the United States Supreme Court agreed to hear out the case, but the ruling was delayed until after the presidential elections. This court case brought up a lot of important questions, as well as controversial questions for that time. Like, does Scott have a right to sue in federal court because that would make him a U.S. citizen? Does he have residence in a free state long enough to make him free? The majority of the court wanted to rule that the Missouri law determined Scott's status as a slave and to say nothing more about it, but others thought it would be best not to influence or interfere with the matter at hand and let them figure it out for themselves, as these territories needed to grow and figure out things for themselves. The results that the court issued in the Dred Scott versus Sanford case claimed that Scott had no standing to sue in federal courts, as he wasn't seen as a citizen of the United States, adding that living in a free territory does not make a slave free. The Constitution supported slavery due to the statements on private property, and because slaves are private property, the Constitution acknowledges that, and that states cannot ban slavery in the territories. And the reason why the Dred Scott ruling was such a major factor in the beginning of the Civil War was because it revealed the corrupt actions of the government, as well as their thoughts on the citizens, especially when it came to race. It also created an even wider chasm between the two sides, as it was a big win for the South, and that granted them protection for their slaves, and it gave them protection to basically control them anytime they wanted. Like, they could take them to the territories and still have their rights protected, even if the territory wanted free status for their new state. Now, after this ruling, the only way Northerners could destroy slavery was through a constitutional amendment, and their opposition thought that would be almost impossible to pull off because so many southern states and territories were for slavery. And this just made things far more complicated than they could ever get. And as I said, just added more fuel to the fire, and that's kind of what led to the Civil War. And that'll be it for the Civil War causes.